Welcome back to another episode of Freeform AI. My name is Michael Burke. I do data engineering and machine learning at Databricks. Today, I am not joined by my co-host. He is coding and probably slightly stressed about it, so we'll give him some space. Today, we are speaking with Dave. Dave has worked as a lawyer for the past 15 years at Scarfo & Hawkins, where he's currently partner. But on the side, he works at Secession Wills, a platform that lets you create your legal will in minutes. So, Dave, I'm curious, why are you focusing on this aspect of AI?
Well, to be honest with you, it didn't start with AI. When I sort of started tinkering with the idea, it was not in the pre AI days, but in pre AI days for us lay people that don't know this stuff. And so the whole platform was actually built, the old fashioned way. And we have recently integrated AI into it in a way that I think is responsible. I think is the main word I want to use here, because as AI comes in contact with the legal industry, we're seeing a lot of crazy stuff out there. Not a week goes by where I don't get clients throwing ChatGPT written legal contracts at me to ask me to review them, or take something I've drafted and runs it through ChatGPT and gives me what the AI came up with in terms of questions or issues. So the whole legal industry is going through probably a period of upheaval right now with AI and how it's going to all shake out. And so I wanted to be a responsible leader in that, in terms of how we used AI with Succession. So we could get into it once I'll give you a bit more of an overview of how the platform actually works. So, as you said, it's an online will builder. Used to be, back in the day, you could buy what was called a will kit, which was like, a package of papers and guides that you could write your own will, right? Instead of going to a lawyer. So these days we have technology to do that, and we have, a very intelligent wizard based system that will walk the user through the process, ask them the questions it needs to ask, and produce a highly customized will at the end of that process. The way we integrated AI into that was, we didn't want to let AI have the pen, so to speak. So the actual wills are created with the same programmatic structure we had from before, where every last line of code and how all of that translates into the actual text of the legal document was all personally created by myself and my partner. So we didn't want to change that. The last thing we wanted to do was have, ChatGPT drafting people's wills and putting our names on it, right? So what we did was, we trained an AI model on our app, right? Like, on both the back end and the front end. And so what it does is, it knows, here's the set of inputs we need to get from the user to be able to create their will, right? I needed to get the wife's name. I need to get the kids' names. I need to know what they want to do about, do they want to be buried or cremated, like all that stuff, right? And so its mission is, get all that data out of the user and do it in a conversational manner, using colloquial language, answer the user's questions on the fly, etc. So again, it doesn't have the pen. It's not doing any drafting. It's just out there on a mission to basically fill out the wizard for the user, so that, because a lot of people, even though we make the wizard very user friendly, it could still feel a little daunting to some people, right? All this legal stuff. So with this way, it much more closely replicates what it's like to go to a lawyer to do your will, right? Because if you come into my office to do your will, Michael, I'm not just going to hand you a questionnaire and be like, fill this out, and then I go to my desk and write it up, right? We're going to have a conversation. I'm going to ask you, pointed questions and try to get you thinking about the right things. You're going to be asking me questions on the fly, and it's going to be more of a conversation. That sort of lawyer experience is what we've replicated with how we've integrated AI.
That's super cool. I have like 5 million questions, but first, about 2 months ago, I actually did create my own living will. My parents are getting a little bit older, and they were like, you should probably have a will. And I was like, yeah, whatever, I'll be healthy and fine. And then eventually my mom put her foot down and was like, just do it, like, because I said so, as moms do. So I went on ChatGPT and I said, hey, ChatGPT, I need a living will. I have some stocks, I rent an apartment, and I don't really own anything else. Draft up a will that is formal enough that if there was reference to it in some court of law, it might help the process. I don't need it to be officially stamped by a lawyer or anything like that, but it's in writing. So ChatGPT was like, sure, it did it. I was like, the next step I did was I asked it to review it and basically say, are there other things that I should be considering when executing this process? So the wizard step that you're referring to, and it added a few other things. And then I ended up with like a page long document, and I typed out Michael Burke as my online signature in Times New Roman and called it a day. I sent it to my family over email, and now there's like a written record digitally of generally what I would want to happen. What did I miss if I had used your platform? Like, what things would I have gained over that ChatGPT based experience?
Okay, yeah, that's great. So I mean, probably the starting point I'd say is, evidently you know what you're doing when it comes to prompting. I fear what most of the population, like how most of the population uses AI and their skill in prompting in order to make sure that they're getting good quality output. So that's the first thing, right? Is it sort of takes that risk factor right out of it. Um, Second thing, I would need to actually see what it produced in terms of sort of knowing how complete or incomplete it might be. But ChatGPT is usually pretty good with that stuff, so I wouldn't be surprised if it covers most of the bases. I'd say probably the big issue, the big thing it might have missed is the actual formalities around execution. So, like at the end, when you typed in your digital signature and emailed it on, depending on what state you're in, you probably still don't have a valid will, right?
Probably.
It goes state by state in terms of like how it has to be done. Like some states will actually allow virtual or electronic signing of a will, but then there are additional layers, like you have to have it notarized or something like that, right? And then other states are still old school, and it's like, no, it's got to be printed and ink signed in blue ink or whatever in front of two witnesses. Like it varies from state to state, and without that, it's a document that expresses your wishes, but it's not actually a legally binding will. And where that matters is, if push came to shove between two people who are potential beneficiaries, right? Like, let's say you have, a long-term girlfriend or something. You've been living with her for years. You're not married legally or anything, and that document says everything goes to like your parents, and something happens to you, and she ends up in a bit of a battle with your parents about where your stuff goes. That document that you prepared wouldn't necessarily carry any weight if it wasn't like properly executed, right?
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
that's probably the big one. and
Okay.
and like I said, just the knowing what questions to ask, knowing how to prompt, knowing what you don't know is a huge factor. And for most people, they might not have the insight or the skill level to do that.
That makes sense. And as we were talking, like this is a somewhat morbid conversation. And when I was going through ChatGPT, I have a pretty high tolerance for talking about death and things like that. Like it wasn't that bad for me. But I'm curious how you guys are approaching tone. So this is a sensitive subject. People use like 70 different words for death, like passed away, like went up to the sky, seven other things. And that alone is an example of how people approach this very differently from a cultural and emotional perspective. So, how have you approached tone with the prompting of your LLM?
hmm I mean, for us, it was primarily about just keeping it very professional, right? We trained it on how to talk like a lawyer, basically. So effectively, we were able to take, my own email history, scrub out anything to do with, any client or personal information. Like, so it's just like raw, like the type of grammar I use, the type of language I use, that kind of thing, before we fed it into any AI, and then basically trained it on how to talk like a lawyer, how to be sensitive yet professional, and that's really sort of what it boils down to. It's the same way I have to approach it in real life with people. Is, yeah, we're talking about difficult subjects. Facing one's mortality is not is not pleasant. And sometimes we got to resort to the euphemisms, like sending you up to the sky or whatever. But at the end of the day, I try to keep it professional and focus on, why are we doing this, right? It's not because we want to think about this happening. It's because we want to protect those we care about and protect the assets or the wealth that you may have built during your lifetime.
Yeah, so driving through that uncomfortable subject is actually really valuable. And yeah, keeping it professional makes sense and targeted. I'm curious though. So before we started recording, we were talking about the billable nature of law. Often there's the stereotype of if a lawyer spends 60 seconds responding to an email, that's an hour of billable work. And so I'm curious, in this industry, how do you think about efficiency optimizations? Are people receptive to it? Are people sort of treating you as a pariah and being like, get away from me, I don't want to actually use this tool? How's the reception been?
Mm-hmm. So right now, like at Succession Wills, right now we're a consumer facing platform, right?
So like
So
TurboTax conceptually for taxes?
exactly. So TurboTax arguably is taking some work away from certain types of accountants, right, who might be doing those tax returns. So our consumer facing platform is essentially that. Now, I always say like this is for the 95%, not for the 5%. What I mean by that is, and this is what sort of gave me the idea to do this in the first place, is so my background is actually more in corporate law, mergers and acquisitions, partnerships, etc. And so in that field, I would deal with a lot of high net worth people with complicated, companies and assets and all this stuff. And to the extent I was doing wills and estate planning, it was like in that context, right? Where there's a lot of work, there's a lot of complexity involved. And that's how I cut my teeth in terms of being able to draft this stuff and do that legal work. And then what would happen is I would get friends and family or whoever saying, "Hey, can you do my will, Dave?" And it's like, well, I can, but for 95% of people out there, they don't have all that complexity. It's really simple. It's, you described your own situation. Like for most people, it's, I have some investments. Maybe I own a house or a car. I want to leave everything to my spouse. And when we're both gone, I want the kids to get everything equally. That's like a huge percentage of wills right there. Right. So that's why we built this, was for that large majority that, maybe because of monetary reasons, or maybe it's just they don't want to have those uncomfortable conversations with somebody in real life. They A lawyer isn't for them, right? Like going to a lawyer for this can cost a few $1,000s, and something like 70% of people out there don't have a will, right? So there's this huge percentage of the population that doesn't have a will, and solving that problem can be fairly cheap and easy for them. And that's why we built this as an alternative. Um, so, like, as far as the receptiveness of lawyers, as I said, to some extent, this is maybe TurboTax in competition with them. But honestly, I think there's always going to be a place for lawyers in this process. And if a tool like this is going to give access to estate planning for an individual who otherwise wouldn't have done it in the first place, then that's still a net positive. Now, all that said, we actually do have a B2B platform that we're currently working on that is more in line, I think, with what you were getting at, where it will actually be basically a CRM for lawyers to use who do wills and estates to help automate and make that workflow more efficient.
That makes a ton of sense. Okay. Yeah, it's really interesting to think about what areas AI make people more comfortable versus less comfortable. So for self-driving cars, there's a lot of pushback. You are really used to having a human at the wheel, and even if the self-driving car will do a better job, it's sometimes a bit unnerving. But for some of these taboo and sensitive subjects like therapy or medical advice or even creating wills, it makes a lot of sense that people would be more comfortable chatting with a computer over a human. Have you found that that's like a key hallmark of adoption for succession wills, or why are people coming to this platform?
We actually have found that the key to adoption has been actually keeping the human element in,
Wow.
believe it or not, right? So it's the more there's a perception that this is purely automated, purely AI, et cetera, the actual less adoption we were seeing. And it was when we started to humanize it a little bit more in terms of, even something as simple as putting my mugshot up on the website, like here's Dave Rosati, the lawyer who built this. Just humanizing it a little bit like that made a huge difference.
That's so surprising. Okay.
Yeah.
And is it because it's such like a human topic, or people are still, you think, not very trusting of AI as a culture? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think partly it could just be generational. The type of people that are in the market for getting their will done are going to tend to be on the older side. And I don't mean old, people in their 30s, 40s. He's like, sort of middle aged is where a lot of people start thinking about this stuff. And I think, I'm 40, I'm a lot older than you. And I come from, us elder millennials are sort of, we were right at the crossroads of the old way versus the new, and we still have a lot of those hangups about relying on technology for everything. I mean, my favorite example was like, Gen Z has no problem booking a flight on their phone. As a millennial, like I have to go on my desktop to book a flight, right? I'm not going to a travel agent. I'm not calling up a travel agent by phone like my parents would or something. But something about being on the desktop computer for something important like that is part of it. So I think as the population, as Gen Z gets older and moves into the next phase of life, and we are encountering a population that is more natively, saturated in technology from a young age, that could change.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm really sorry that you have to go on your desktop to book flights. That just sounds terrible. I could
I
never.
can't help it. I can't help it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's been really interesting to see over the past several years how AI is perceived both in the States and globally. And of course, I'm not an authoritative figure on it, but it's just really fascinating. Like the arc of ChatGPT comes out, everybody is like, this is the greatest thing ever. Then 2 weeks later, they're like, holy crap, this is going to change everything. And then there was a year or two of sort of the models aren't quite good enough or reliable enough to actually automate processes. And I think, at least from the Databricks perspective, we're there. We're using a ton of internal tooling to automate processes. We're leaning in super heavy. There's mandates from our CEO for AI spend every month. If you miss that, if you're under the value, you're deemed as less productive.
Like we're talking like on your like Claude Max
Mm-hmm.
account, you gotta get this much money in extra usage charges or you're in trouble. Wow.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, and just subscriptions. I am a pretty firm believer that AI automation is actually really, really powerful, and we're right there because of all the MCP connectors and like tool use. It actually has like hands that it can do things with. It has eyes that it can see. It's not just a brain in a vacuum that can like chat and spit out fun
Yeah.
facts.
Yeah.
So this is a great example of document creation plus interacting with a front end app to gather context, plus some context augmentation, I'm sure, on the back end for legal stuff. And that's as much as I'll say about it because I don't know anything about legal stuff. But I know you're the non-technical counterpart, but can you say anything about the tech stack or how you guys have implemented it and how that process has been?
Frankly, I would probably butcher it if I tried. If I had my partner Nick on here, he could go all day. I think I'm a good example of a year ago, I was just a lawyer who didn't know anything about AI or any of this stuff. And
Because you
now
guys launched 5 months ago, right?
just in January, really,
Yeah.
we started building
Oh,
it a
three
while
months.
ago.
Wow.
Like I wanted to be, given the importance of, you're dealing with people's entire livelihoods, their wills, legal documents. I was very insistent that, we need to make sure it's working properly before we let real world users in here. Like this was not a, throw an MVP up there and see what happens and, build the parachute while you're falling. Like we had to make sure it was done right. So we took our time to build it before launching in January. In that time, yeah, I mean, I sometimes have amazed myself now with my technical skill I've learned over the last year and my proficiency with the various AI tools out there. But when it comes to our back end, I would be at a loss, I hate to say.
Got it. Yeah. And so you focus more on evals and like demoing the tool and ensuring it adheres to your lawyer training and like what
Yeah.
you would produce. Got it.
Yeah, like so my partner Nick, he's the technical guy, so he was responsible for and is responsible for the whole tech stack and what's happening on the back end. And basically, he'd release an update and I would try to break it. And he'd release an update and I would try to break it. And I was just, back and forth iterations of doing that for like literally months where I would try to come up with whatever edge cases I could to trick it or break it. And then he would fix it and on and on.
Got it. And have you liked that collaboration process? Because we often see that where there's a technical state or non-technical stakeholder and then a technical implementer, and they sort of have to bridge the gap. And often it's in the form of feedback. But has that worked for you?
It has, but I'll say that it got significantly better when I uh, improved my own technical knowledge, right? So for the first however long of that process, I was very much, I'm the lawyer. I don't know this tech stuff. All I'm doing is auditing the app and sending him, an email or a Word document with here's all my notes, right? And then he's got to deal with it. In what then occurred is the more, especially when I started getting comfortable with AI and could use those tools to educate myself and to better interpret what was going on, um, suddenly I can speak in his language better, right? And suddenly I can actually do some of these things myself. Like, I'm going onto our GitHub and changing things around and dropping in new lines of code and everything. Like, I mean, with Claude, it's insane what you can do as somebody with no tech. So I found that really helped with the collaboration. So to circle back to your question, I think a good foundation for a collaboration between a tech founder and a non-technical founder is that they both have to put in a little bit of effort to understand each other's language and appreciate what exactly is involved in the other person's role. Like, how much work is it that I'm asking you to do when I throw this audit report in at you on a Sunday night or something, right?
No, exactly. Yeah, that's one of the learnings that I unfortunately concluded a few years back. And I'll just reference a public project, but I was creating a search bar for Fox Sports. So if you go to foxsports.com and type in stuff, that's Databricks code on the back end that me and a colleague wrote. And I thought I could just abstract all the subject matter expertise to Fox Sports team. They know sports, they know like what they want to be servicing, they know evals and like what's a good result versus a bad result. And pretty quickly I learned that as you're especially inventing new products, like in the startup space with Succession Wills, you really don't know what good looks like. And the technical informs the product informs the technical, and it's sort of this back and forth. And you really can't create the silo of just coding. You need to understand the use case, the user experience, the product itself, the value proposition, and also the subject. So fully
And
agreed on that.
well, I'll give you another example of it working the other way, right? So I said how I sort of became more educated on the technical side, able to speak the right language with him, and it resulted in a better feedback and collaboration approach. It works the other way too. So we actually originally built like the original app that we built doesn't exist anymore because by the time we got to the end, now my partner Nick knows all this stuff about wills and the legal elements that he didn't know at the beginning, right? At the beginning, he was sort of to some extent coding with a blindfold on, like he's doing the code and I'm explaining what it is we want and why, but the underlying, the real, capital W why of we're doing one thing versus another was, sort of over his head. And by the end of building that first app, he understood it. So one Monday morning, he, sends me a message on Slack like, so yeah, I rebuilt the whole app over the last 72 hours. And he had just from the ground up, now that he could see the full picture and we'd been through all of that debugging and all of that feedback loop process, he was able to recreate an app that is 10 times better in such a fast amount of time. It was really amazing. I mean, obviously he various elements of it were piggybacked on the old thing, especially on the actual document generation logic side of it. It was more of a front end experience, but nevertheless it was pretty amazing.
Yeah. 72 hours is quick turnaround time for sure.
Yeah. Again, mostly front end, but yeah.
Yeah, that's super interesting. What are some personality traits that you think are required for this technical and non-technical collaboration?
Humility, and for us, like that's been everything, right? Is we're both we're both humble with each other. We both respect each other's time, right? I'm not barking orders at him. He's not barking orders at me. We respect that we each have our own different domain here, and we both bring something valuable to the table. And we both have families, we all of that, right? So just like having respect for the other person and not treating them like some kind of workhorse or something is essential really to any working relationship in my view, but particularly among partners. And actually we personally knew each other before this, so he's actually the spouse of one of my colleagues at my law firm.
Got it. Okay, cool. And does that personal relationship help, you think?
Maybe a little bit. We knew each other, but like
Hmm.
not well. It's not like we were close friends or anything, right? Like I had maybe interacted with him a couple of times at the office Christmas party or something like that.
Yeah.
So there was some familiarity at the beginning, but really it was over the course of this project that we've gotten to know each other
And just curious, how did it start?
at a work party,
Cool,
like
like over a beer.
at the bar. Yeah.
Cool.
Like I had the idea. So I had actually, I say like, I don't have a technical background, but I always loved technology, right? So back in like high school, I took a computer science class where, for whatever reason, our teacher at the time made us learn to code in Pascal. Yeah, I guess he thought that it was like would create some sort of foundational whatever. I don't know, but I I took to it and I loved it. Right, like I remember our end of the year project was to write a game, and I had fully written my game, and then I decided I'm going to build a whole sequel to the game that you unlock if you get to the end of the first game. And just pulling all nighters, loving doing it. And then when I went off to college, this is circa 2003. So back then, believe it or not, it wasn't tech you go into to make money. You go become a doctor or a lawyer or something, right? So I sort of abandoned that passion and I went into business and law and all of that. But when I started as a lawyer at my firm a few years later, right off the jump, I was trying to find ways to make things more efficient. You'd be amazed at how antiquated the way a lot of law firms do things is. There were still people using, I'm not joking, there were still people using literal typewriters when I joined.
Typewriters?
Typewriters, yeah, because of like little things like, so like a stock certificate, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to produce a stock certificate for a company, there's this pre-printed fancy looking paper you're supposed to use, and the staff couldn't understand how to like set up a template with all the right offsets and everything like in Microsoft Word to be able to do like whatever you're entering, the company name, the number of shares, etc., and be able to feed that through your printer and have it print. So they would take that stock certificate and put it in a typewriter instead and literally use a typewriter to type out all that stuff. So that's just like a silly example, but right off the bat I was like, okay, how can I, so much of my job, not so much, but a good chunk of my job, especially as a junior lawyer, was like a lot of tedious grunt work, right? Where you're pumping out documents, or whatever. So early on, I started figuring out how to automate a lot of legal document generation. And I was doing it like with VBA and like the actual built in, there's some, Boolean fields you can use, and there's some field stuff you can do in Microsoft Word to get some auto text going. So I was like literally creating these legal document generation things in this very basic coding language that I was teaching myself, and that's what sort of led to all this. So I had it in my head for a long time. I really need to do this with wills, right? I really need to come up with an automator for wills, but because of the decision trees involved, like the sort of logical, the ways in which the text of the will needs to dynamically change based on how the user has answered a previous question or something like that, was a little beyond me. And so I never actually jumped into doing it myself, and it was at a work party when I was having a beer with Nick that he mentioned, he was freelancing at the time, and he was between projects and looking to do something in the legal space, and I said, well, let's do it.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. Okay. Yeah, curious to zoom out a little bit. So we talked a little bit about the billable nature of law and how efficiency might not always be super rewarded. And also, you mentioned antiquated systems have a lot of inertia. They sometimes stay where they are and don't get overwritten with the latest and greatest.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, how do you expect tools like this? And one of the classic startups is Harvey, right? How do you expect these like AI forward law solutions to disrupt industry?
I mean, to some extent, it's anyone's guess right now. Most of the solutions that, because we get as a law firm, like we're pitched constantly, cold emails, whatever, constantly for, various AI based solutions. And it seems like the vast majority of them are continuing to focus on the lawyer's actual job, right? Like, how can we use AI to help generate documents, or how can we use AI to do whatever legal research needs to be done on a given question, things like that. I obviously understand why, if I'm developing software for lawyers, why my knee-jerk reaction would be to develop software that helps the lawyer do their job. But the problem with it is that most law is based on the billable hours. This tool let me do that research in 15 minutes instead of 4 hours. What do I do now? Do I only get to bill for 15 minutes worth of my time, or do I get to bill for the full 4 hours worth of my time? So as a lawyer, I'm less incentivized to use tools like that. People are still doing it. Don't get me wrong. Everybody, if you have a lot of work to do and this tool is going to help you get through it faster, you're going to use it. But in my view, because of how the billable hour works, I have some skepticism about those types of tools, really getting full blown widespread adoption by lawyers. And also lawyers are just very, very conservative. Like lawyers are one of the most sued professions there is. If you screw up anything, everybody points the finger at you. You're dealing with a lot of complex moving parts. So, and we do a lot of schooling, right? So we think we're smarter than everybody else, and we think we're smarter than the AI, and we don't want to use it. I think, like personally, my theory is that it's going to be more on the administrative side, where AI and other automation tools can really, really benefit law firms. And I think, what true progress looks like in that regard is, hey, if I have $1 million a year law practice, as in, I have enough clients and enough work that generates $1 million in billable hours a year, if it took, you know, two junior lawyers and three, paralegals or legal assistants to be able to run that $1 million practice 5 years ago, I think, what we're going to see is that I could run that $1 million practice as a one man show, or maybe like with one assistant or something, right? And
Wow.
that's where the true progress will lie, because my revenue hasn't changed. I haven't taken a bite out of my revenue by necessarily doing my element of the job faster. What I've done is take a bite out of my expenses by removing all of that support staff and all of the time I was paying them that wasn't part of the billable revenue.
Man, I was hoping for a AI makes everything better story, but wow, that makes sense.
I'm
Like,
I'm not a I mean I love AI. I use AI every day. I'm as forward looking as it gets when it comes to a lawyer. Um, but I have a fair bit of pessimism around what it looks like for most industries for the immediate future. Now, long term, that doesn't mean AI is not a net positive for society long term, but there's going to be some growing pains, right? Like the horseshoe maker who got put out of
right.
business when the Model T started rolling out. That guy never, even though we all love cars, that particular guy got the short end of the stick.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you think it's going to disrupt pricing models for lawyers? Like, would they move away from hours billable? And also, second, it makes a lot of sense that we'd focus on sort of the pipeline and the internal processes that are not billable so that lawyers can only spend their time on billable work. So I feel like those could be two directions that
Yeah.
this impact could have. Which do you think it is, or is it a third?
I think it's both of those. How what we do with the billable hour, what the revenue side of the equation looks like. I think the expense side of the equation is fairly obvious, right? Use automation, use AI to get the same amount of work done with fewer people. That's going to be a lot of industries. On the revenue side of the equation and what we do at the billable hour, it's a bit of a tougher nut to crack. One reason why lawyers don't so there's three ways lawyers charge. It's either the billable hour, it's flat fee work. Like certain things, if you would come to me and say, hey,
Right.
incorporate a new corporation for me, that's usually like a flat fee thing, right? Like you prepare the articles of incorporation, you file them, it's all predictable. We charge a flat fee for that. And then there's contingency, right? So a lot of like personal injury law, for instance, works on contingency, where you see those billboards, if we don't win, you don't pay. What that really means is that if we win, we're taking a percentage of the payout,
Right.
like a real estate agent would, basically. Now that model, that contingency model, is not really used in business law, corporate law, in a lot of other areas of law outside of personal injury. At least part of the reason for that is that lawyers, we have a fiduciary duty to our clients, meaning we have to put the client's interests above our own. And if I'm doing a real estate deal for somebody and we're buying a piece of land to develop it, and I'm going to earn on contingency, right? If I'm only going to make money if the deal closes, and then I'm going to get a big fat percentage of it, I'm incentivized as the lawyer in that situation to like sweep things under the rug, right? Like if I'm searching title and I find some issue with the title to the property, I'm going to be more inclined to sort of downplay that. Like maybe not consciously. I'm not saying, lawyers are going to would start scamming people or being intentionally dishonest, but to the extent there are incentives and biases that we all as human beings have, having that financial interest in the outcome of the transaction could affect the lawyer's impartiality and ability to truly act in the best interest of the client. So that's one reason why we stay away, generally speaking, from contingency work in most areas of law. And the problem with what do we do with the billable hour is, if without the billable hour, what's our other option, right? I mean,
Flat
it's
fees.
pretty much,
Yeah.
yeah, flat fees, which the problem with flat fees is so difficult to predict in a
Yeah.
lot of areas of law. Like it could go in so many directions. You come to me and say, hey, I just fired somebody and they're threatening to sue me. How much is that going to cost? I have no idea.
Hmm.
Like, who do they hire as their lawyer? What are the circumstances? There's what's going to come out of the woodwork in 6 months from now. Like there's so many variables that it's just too difficult for most work to set a flat fee at the beginning, and that's why we bill by the hour.
Yeah, that makes sense. For FDE and a lot of professional services, it's just consulting, so it's the exact same thing. And I have really mixed feelings about it. Like for Databricks specifically, we need all those hours typically, and stuff is usually well scoped. And if we go significantly over or under, we revisit the scope. But yeah, it's a mechanism that doesn't reward efficiency in the same way as a flat fee would. It rewards quality typically a bit more, and so depends upon what you're trying to optimize for. But I'm super curious, and this will probably be the final question. But zooming out like even more, what aspect of law do you think is still fundamentally human? So we can like make sending emails faster. We can populate documents. We can do a lot of the like admin stuff via AI. And as the tools get better, they'll get more reliable. And then maybe we can even remove a lot of the staff associated with that, for better or for worse. So what are the things in like the next 6 months, and then maybe even 2 to 5 years, that you think are still going to be the hallmark of a lawyer's job, augmented by AI?
I mean, the one area I can think of that is truly gotta stay immune to being replaced with tech and will stay fundamentally human are like when you get deep into a negotiation. Again, whether it's a lawsuit and you're negotiating a settlement, or whether it's a business deal and you're negotiating some sort of contract or what have you, most of it can still be done electronically. Like most of that is happening via email. Zoom calls or Google Meet calls, whatever. And technology has changed things significantly. I work remotely for the most part in my law firm. I used to put on a suit and tie every day and go to the office, and I don't do that anymore. So technology has already fundamentally changed a lot, but there still comes times when you're truly in the heat of battle, where the only way to get it done is to actually get people in the same room physically. And I don't know what it is. There's something about when people have to look at each other face to face and have that negotiation that it changes the dynamics. And I mean, even like there are times when, like, forget about we can't do this by email, we need a Zoom call. There are times when even that Zoom call is not the same. You need to get people physically in the same room. And I say that as somebody who avoids that like the plague. So I hate to say it, but there is that, 10th hour, everything's on the line. We need to get through whatever this one issue is, sort of personal element that you need the lawyers there in the same room as people, and just humans interacting with each other the old fashioned way.
Yeah, I think it's a quality of communication potentially. Like we see the same thing in like forward deployed engineers. Like the majority of the time, you want to just be coding or like working off a Jira board or whatever it might be. But sometimes when there's strong disagreements, being in the same room humanizes everyone, and then communication is just so much more efficient.
Yeah,
I mean, it
yeah,
sometimes is so much more efficient that it leads to results that would not be possible digitally.
yeah,
So that makes a lot
yeah.
of
I
sense.
think. Well, I think there's empathy and emotional, unspoken body language, emotional communication that occurs when two human beings are in the same room. That even with a video, real time video call is not replicated the same way. We tend to be more empathetic to what somebody else is saying to us when we're physically with them.
Yeah, well said. And they also can't multitask. I wonder if you and your co-founder met over a Zoom call, if this company would even exist. The fact that you were together with a beer, it's a very
Yeah,
different type of
yeah,
interaction.
yeah, that too.
Okay, cool. Well, this has been a really fun conversation. I'll quickly summarize some points that stood out to me at least. So first, AI for sensitive topics is really compelling to users, but Succession Wills has actually seen the inverse of this, where the users actually want the human component, and AI is just used to augment some of the data collection. Collaboration across specialties, typically the collaborators need to overlap to some degree. So if it's technical and non-technical, both need to learn about each other's respective fields to be effective, and humility and respect is forefront in this partnership. For billable practices, law firms will likely decrease staff, but for flat fees, efficiency is rewarded. But we'll have to see how sort of AI in the space plays out. It's a very psychologically and like organizationally driven field. So efficiency is not always the thing that's perfectly optimized. And for the things that are fundamentally human, the main one is in-person negotiations when there's a heat of battle and you guys are need to basically collaborate a lot more effectively, communicate more efficiently. That's probably one area that is going to stay untouched by AI. So if people want to learn more about you or Succession Wills, Dave, where should they go?
So we are successionwills.com, one word. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Succession Wills. And yeah, there's plenty to learn on there, where I'm dropping articles on our website all the time as well, just sort of exploring some of these themes. A lot of it is, wills and estates focused legal stuff, but I'm increasingly starting to drift towards, having it be more of a general legal issues and law meets tech sort of platform for education. So lots to see on there.
Amazing. Well, until next time, it's been Michael Burke, and have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.